So hello everyone and welcome to Film 3 in AlzAuthors' very first film festival in celebration of our 10th anniversary. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. I'm Marianne Sciucco, a founder and manager of AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. And I'm the author of Blue Hydrangeas, an Alzheimer's love story. We have a terrific lineup of films to not only educate you about the realities of Alzheimer's and dementia, but to provide you with insider insights and strategies from filmmakers who have navigated their own dementia journeys. Our hope is that you will take away at least one piece of information or tip to ease your journey. Today, we're meeting with Frank Silverstein, creator of the film Lousy, Love in the Time of Dementia. Frank, a veteran television producer, captured random situations with his parents, both of whom had dementia, with his iPhone while visiting them to demonstrate what goes on in these situations, giving a glimpse into the realities of life with dementia. Frank was a career network and cable TV producer at ABC News, 2020, CNN, CBS News, and MSNBC. His stories have always focused on the struggles and passions of people in the news and behind the scenes. He co-authored a book about entrepreneurship called It's Your Business, published by Hachette. He also produced several independent documentaries, including Canal Street, River to River, which premiered on New York's WNYC. Currently, he is a consultant helping entrepreneurs and other professionals to find their voice and to tell their stories in video, text, and still images for broadcast and social media. So has everybody here watched Lousy?
Yeah.
If not, you can catch it later. The link is good for the remainder of the film festival. So you can watch all the films. If you haven't had a chance to view them all yet, you can watch them all through the end of the year. So I'd like to introduce my podcast partner, Christy Byrne Yates, who manages our YouTube channel. Hi, Christy.
Hi, Marianne. Excited to be here again
Oh,
and happy to
yeah.
be here with the group.
She's the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. So we are recording and we will post the recording to our YouTube channel and also for our podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. And you can listen to it on all the major podcast sites and find it on our website, AlzAuthors.com. So let's get started. Welcome, Frank. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're so happy to have you here and to be able to share your film, which is truly remarkable. And I like the fact that it is short because it says a lot in like a very short time. So first of all, I wanted to ask you to start off by telling us a little bit about your television career and how that led you to create this film.
Well, I spent a lot of time at ABC News 2020,
Mm-hmm.
which is a news magazine program. And I also worked at CNN with Paula Zahn, who had long ago a news magazine program. And I would say that my focus has been what's called news magazines, and is short, compelling stories, either about crime or about health issues or about social problems. And so I have a radar for when things are gonna really hit the roof. And that's what I tend to look for as a journalist. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my background.
Okay. So I mentioned in your intro that saw what was going, I guess, hitting the roof with your parents, and it compelled you to take out your iPhone and start recording some of these incidents.
Yeah, my wife and I used to go visit my folks. They're about an hour away from where I live, and we would visit them, and they were living independently in a house. And one day we showed up, and my mother and father started getting really uncomfortable, and they said, "It's time for you to leave now," 5 minutes after we arrived for lunch. And they got very agitated. And so my wife and I said, "Okay, fine, goodbye." And we went out for about an hour. We had some coffee, wandered around the town, and then we showed up back. And my mother was beside herself. And she's like, "Where have you been? We've been so worried about you. What happened?" And I realized that something really strange was going on. My parents had been gradually becoming more and more disconnected. And I guess it's very easy to overlook that. You just think, oh, they're kind of old and they missed this. They would have trouble turning on the coffee maker. They couldn't figure out how to operate that. They couldn't figure out how to dial the telephone. They would have problems with this or that. And my brother and I would drive up to go help them out with whatever it was that was going on. But we hadn't really, I guess, connected the dots. Um, and so at that moment, when my mother started saying, "Oh my God, I didn't know who you were," I just thought this is so incredibly odd and strange. I have to film it because that's what I do. So I flipped out my camera and I just set it on the coffee table and continued to talk to them. The rest of the film is essentially small clips like that of things that were going on, uh, that intimate moments that you would never ever be able to film in a formal way. And so that I had no idea what I was going to do with it when I started filming it. I just thought these are strange bits of stuff and I need to have it on tape. I mean, it was important because it was the first real eye opener of like, oh, my parents need a lot more help than they're getting. And so by the time they died, by the time I finished filming, obviously we had gotten them a lot of help and we were watching them. But I continued to film all the way through of the care
Mhm.
that they had.
Now, are they aware of you filming them?
They were sometimes. And at the time, I just filmed them without particularly paying attention to that. Um, I would say that when my parents were alert and did not have dementia, they would have been horrified to see themselves in the condition they were. And in
Mhm.
fact, my parents used to say they would point to some, you know, person in the street and they would say, if I ever end up like that, just shoot me, which is, I think, a very common thing that you hear people say. And in fact, one of my neighbors, when my parents got to be quite gone, one of my next door neighbors said to me, oh, they've gone past their sell by date and they're not living a full life. And what, they basically, why don't you shoot them? And it provoked for me this thought of like, yep, I get it. They are not living the lives that they used to live. They're not being the people they were proud of being. But I also thought, okay, would it be today? And I would think, no. And then would it be tomorrow? And I'm not sure. And that's when I began to look at really what their life was like. And I noticed that my dad would have breakfast, and then 20 minutes later, he would come and yell at me that nobody's feeding him. He hasn't had breakfast yet. And I would say, okay, what do you want? Waffles, scrambled eggs? And he'd have a second breakfast. And then he'd get a third breakfast. And he was enjoying the waffles. He was enjoying the ice cream. He was enjoying the coffee. And I thought, you know what? He's having it's not that he's not being who he was, but he certainly is enjoying being alive.
Mhm.
And my mother took her dementia in a slightly different direction. She tended to be a little grumpier. But she also, there were these moments when she would just beam and you would think, okay, you know what? She's alive. She's enjoying it. I'm not shooting her. And I think a lot of people don't you just don't realize, or you tend to think, oh my God, look how diminished this person is. And you don't see that, in fact, they are not dead and they are not ready to be dead. And you've got to be right in there to give them what you can.
So well said. I really appreciate that because it's like we see this through the lens of who we are right now, and others do too, and we can't imagine what it would be like to be this way. So I appreciate that so
Mm.
much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us were your parents like before they had dementia? What kind of a life did they lead? From what I understand, they had an exemplary life that many people would envy.
Yeah, I mean, my parents my mother grew up in Brooklyn, and all she wanted to do was get the hell out of Brooklyn. And my father grew up in Burbank, California, and hated the circumstances that his father had died early. He had a big family. They were abusing him, not physically, but the other family members had a family store. And since his father was dead, he became the kind of whipping boy for the store, and his inheritance was sort of removed. So he wanted to get out of California. He and my mom had bigger dreams for what they could be. He was in World War II, and then when got out, he went to study politics at Cornell University. He and my mom had big dreams, and they immediately, in 1956, when I was born, they flew out of New York and went to Rangoon, Burma. And they led a life for the rest of their life, pretty much attending diplomatic cocktail parties, meeting various leaders of foreign countries. Dad wrote, they were a classic 50s couple. My father wrote the books, and my mother edited them and made them comprehensible. Um, and they had they led the life they wanted to, and they were unfettered by what their families thought about anything. And they took my brother and I along. My father was very involved with things at the UN, with things at a university where he taught. So when this, I mean, so ironically, the BBC used to, not all the TV, radio stations used to interview my father when weird stuff happened in Burma. And by the time had really lost it, he gave it up very easily. It's like, I don't know anything about this. But the BBC would continue to call. And and I would get on the phone and I would say, I am sorry, but my father is not speaking to you right now. Because my mother was like, oh, yes, just a minute. I'll put him right on. But yeah, I mean, but the thing that's interesting is that although they led a pretty dramatic and colorful life that maybe others don't have quite that same background, I would say that people that watch the film, it's not a, I mean, as much as, I mean, everybody has things that they aspire to, things that they're proud of, accomplishments of whether they're big or small, accomplishments that mean something to them, and relationships. I mean, my mother and father were each other's very best friends. The easy thing to say is, oh, they were so important and they were so smart, and then they were cut down so low. But the fact of the matter is that pretty much anybody that's been through this, regardless of what their parents did, you see the same thing. I mean, a friend of mine, there's a section in the film where my mother and father start screaming at each other. And it was very weird and awkward. And there was a little piece of me that thought, oh, they're unfiltered now. Is this what they really thought about each other? And then I realized, no, this is the dementia. And part of the way I came to that was a neighbor of mine came to me and he'd seen the film and he said, my parents have dementia. And they started yelling at each other just like your parents did. And I was so shocked because they never did that to each other. And he said, I realized it was the disease and not the true, the feeling everybody has is when your parents turn to you and say, I hate you or whatever, that's their true personality. And I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of it is reflecting the disease.
I think that's really true, and I remember that with my parents, right? And I have since had people in my life, relatives, say, "Oh, your dad was so mean to your mom," and I'm thinking, you're talking about a very small part of their life, and he was in pain physically, and he had vascular dementia, and there was a lot going on, and let's look at the entirety of their life, and I just I think it's so easy to judge and say this is what it is, when in fact, like you're saying, we're, most of us are not acutely aware of how dementia manifests for each and every person, and an event it manifests very differently, right? So I think that that's it's nice to tuck that away in your heart that this was something else. This wasn't,
Right. The
the
disease
entirety.
talking in large
Yeah,
part and not
yeah.
the person.
I wanted to ask you, Marianne asked about recording, and you are a documentarian, a filmmaker. Was that a way for you to understand, cope with, process what all was happening? And I ask you that because a lot of our ALS authors journal or write, and that's their medium for kind of making sense of. And is that why it came to you to record and think of it this way?
Partially. I mean, as I say, I am a journalist and I'm used to filming people and walking into really awkward, uncomfortable. I walk into people's lives at the most awful moment of it, and I need to figure out how to make them comfortable with me being part of it, and I don't know them. And to find in their circumstance the challenges that they're facing, whether they'd been raped or whether they had been attacked or, whatever it was that brought them to my attention as a national journalist, to find something in what they're going through that would be meaningful and uplifting in some way for others. So, but when I was filming my folks, it was in part to understand. It's like, oh, what the heck is going on? And also to document, there were, most of what was going on was very tender between them. And I kind of felt like I want to capture that. I just wanted to capture everything. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And honestly, when it was done, I had, I don't know how many hours worth of stuff, and I couldn't look at it. I just could not look at it. I thought, okay, I got to put this into a film. And as a journalist, it's like, oh yeah, whatever, it's like this person got assassinated and I would flip through the footage or, here's 9/11. It's like, here's people doing this, that, and the other, and there's ambulances. And I'm used to that kind of cutting through it and finding the storyline. With my parents, I would look at it for 10 minutes, I'd start crying, and then I would put it away. And 3 weeks later, I would try again. So the making of the film was kind of an effort to make sense of what it was, and it also was kind of making me feel yeah, and also to let people know. And that, there's a number of people have asked me, like, well, would your parents have given permission to film them like this? And they might not have been entirely comfortable about it. My brother and I were responsible for them. My feeling was that so many people don't understand dementia. Partly they think it's goofy old people doing goofy, weird shit. And others think like these are people who are the walking dead, get them out of my sight. And I felt like if you're not living it, you don't really have an appreciation for the texture of it and what. So that was my feeling. Is like, I want this to be pretty unvarnished, and I'm not going to make the ugly parts look nice, and I'm not going to make the nice parts look nicer. Um, and that it would be of benefit to people. And I think that my parents would have understood that if they had been able to make that decision. The thing that I did was my brother was the primary caregiver for lots of reasons. And when I was all done and I'd finished cutting the film, I I I sent it to him, and I said, if you do not want other people to see this film, I'll do nothing with it. I said, if you feel comfortable with me, and I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. And then he called me up. I called him up and I said, well, and he said, well, it's honest, was his answer. It was his answer. And so he said, fine, you can show it. And so that I felt was my protection for them, was that my brother had nothing to do with the film, and the fact that, if he was not comfortable with how they were presented, that I would respect his view, which was scary on my part.
Wow. It's the process that you describe is very similar to the process that many of the writers had in creating their books. Most of, I think, have been written after the death of their person. And so now they're going back to revisiting the what happened, the situation. Everything happened so quickly and in so much confusion. I always say, like, confusion begets confusion. Everybody in the situation is confused by a number of things, and you're so immersed in it and just trying to get through the day that you don't really have time to process or to like think about what's going on. What does this mean? What does this mean for my family? What does this mean for them? How does this, how do I explain this? So when they get to that point, those the authors that we work with here, and they produce their book, for them it is just this travel back into time that is very painful, and it comes at a very great cost to the author. I don't know if people realize that when they read these stories, how much pain has been, walked through in getting that book done. And it's also very cathartic. They find that they're able to release a lot of the anger and the sadness and the grief that they experienced, and perhaps they were holding on to, or they had no place to put it. So now they put it into this project, a book, a film, poetry, whatever they create. There's a lot of different ways to express yourself. That's how basically what you're saying, how you felt.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's something very helpful. It's very isolating when you are taking care of your parents or whoever you're taking care of.
Mm.
There's nobody really that's going to help you. Most of the people, including the doctors and many of the aides, have no understanding of what's going on. And they talk about the fog of war, where soldiers have incoming missiles and things are on fire and people are getting hurt, and you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And there's nobody that's going to lift you up. You have to figure out your path out of there. And I think that for me and my wife, actually, we were members of a Alzheimer's support group that was incredibly good. And that was a once every month, we would sit down with a few other people and a leader that was a social worker. And people would just say, "Oh my God, this happened. I don't even know." And they would say, "Oh, that's so common," or "That's really rare." And so
Hmm.
that was very, very helpful to process it. And I think these books have the similar
Hmm.
function.
Yeah. I mean, our core mission is to let people know that you are not alone.
Yeah.
And reading somebody else's story, for so many people, it's soothing and it's helpful to know that, gee, this person made it through, and I guess I will too. You know, they just feel like they're not alone, and what they're
Yeah.
going through is not unique.
I really appreciate that you are sharing that you went to a support group because I think that that is so important. What I've seen, I benefited from that as well. So thank you for mentioning that. And I'm not sure if you had another direction you wanted to go, Marianne. I did want to follow up on like you accumulated all this footage, but then you also your movie is so wonderful because it integrates some other footage that you have and beautiful memories from your parents. And it made me think of all of the stuff I had to sort through with both my parents. So, I mean, I resonate with you on one being the adult taking care of or managing the care of two parents at the same time with dementia. That was my situation as well.
Uh,
And then I know a lot of pretty brutal, right? And then also just that sorting through. And I wondered when I get it, like not being able to look at this for more than 10 minutes without, really crumbling a little bit inside and that grief that comes up. Did you find, going through some of the old footage and there's a little montage of some of the precious things your mother had accumulated over time. How did that go for you? That was a really hard piece for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny. My mom well, both of them. I mean, she really took a lot of pride in the objects that she had in the house, and she had, I think for in that period of time, the taste she had in things, she took enormous pride in. And people would come to the house and they would always say, "Oh, these are beautiful plates. Oh, this is a beautiful painting." And so I've always enjoyed all that stuff. And it always felt so integral to who they were. And it was, and when they died, I mean, my brother and I sort of couldn't, it's hard to get rid of. I mean, basically we, between the two of us, we had like an entire other household's worth of stuff.
Mm.
And each thing was, it's everybody, it's like, oh, this is the souvenir from here, and this was this wonderful this and that. Um, and yeah, I mean, my mother identified herself through that stuff, but it was interesting because at a certain point, it didn't make a darn bit of difference. It was like useless to her. And she, I mean, there were certain things that were very fragile, and she would just, they would go flying. And at that point in her life, those things were not helpful. They were not expressive of anything, and they meant nothing. And so um, it was a mixture of like, oh, wow, she is a totally different person. And it also makes you just realize, as much as all these wonderful objects are that we have, whether they're actually precious or whether they are precious because they evoke something, are really, they're not
Yeah,
that valuable in the end of the day. That diamond ring, it could disappear down the drain and nobody would know or care.
right.
Um,
And then, because you cared for or managed the care or were involved in the care of two parents who both had dementia, did you find, and you kind of alluded to this, that they had dementia manifested a little differently for each of them? Can you talk a little bit about that and
oh yeah, sure.
how you and your
So
brother managed that?
yeah, I mean, we never had them tested for anything. I just didn't want to go there. I didn't, it was my impression that if they had this kind of dementia or that kind of dementia, it wasn't, there's no cure for it, there's no drugs for it. So why do we need to go into the weeds on this? It's clear that they are diminished and they can't operate. So my father was always, his attitude was always, don't look back. And he would say this to me even when I was a teenager. He's like, make a choice, go forward. If it's the wrong choice, then you'll figure out how to recover, but don't relitigate an old story. And my mother was the control freak in the family. I mean, that's a harsh way of describing it, but really, my mother was the logistics person. And so if there was a dinner party, she had lists of the people she'd invited to dinner, what she had served them, so that she could go into her files. And it's like, if they had roast beef the last time they were here, they're not getting roast beef the next time they come to visit. She had, she would be preparing for Thanksgiving, a month in advance. She was, they flew a lot, they traveled a lot. My mother made all the travel plans from the hotels to the research. So when her dementia became clear, she did not accept it. She was furious. And at the end of her life, she refused to go to sleep. She would never go, she did not lie down in a bed for probably a year and a half. She would only sit in a chair. You would say, "Ma, you're tired. Let's go to bed." And she would sort of wake up and she'd say, "No, I'm not ready to go to sleep now." And then she would wander around the house all night, and then she would nod off in her chair. And I mean, it was horrible, but she could not accept that she couldn't be in control of things and that she didn't know what was going on. And so she made herself be alert. My dad, on the other hand, was like, I can't do that anymore. I'm not gonna. And so he was far more accepting of that. And if things didn't quite make sense to him, he would just go with it.
Wow.
So that it was very different, and I'm sure that they had different kinds of dementias, and I don't know anything about what that means.
Sure.
But yeah, and but yeah, it was really not easy to
It's a
they
lot to navigate.
yeah, and the other weird thing was that my father lost it first, and then my mother was always, "Oh, I can't believe it! People come, we have dinner with people, and they think my that Joe is such a nincompoop, and they don't appreciate that he was such an important person." And then my mother far exceeded him, and at a certain point, her dementia became even more complex than his, and so for a while she was taking care of him. Anyway, yeah, it was they each had very different needs from each other.
Mm. That's interesting what you say about how, the person with dementia taking care of the other person with dementia. I know in some of these situations where it's these two together and it's like a long married couple that have been close, like your parents, that it becomes like them against the world.
Oh
They
yeah.
have a very tight unit, and now you're battling the both of them. Worse, in another situation, you're helping the person without dementia. You're like helping them care for the person with dementia.
Oh, I mean, it was crazy. At some, sometimes you lose it with your folks when,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you got to go to the bathroom now. We got to get you changed. And my mother would say, absolutely not. And you'd go, come on, Ma. And you'd sort of try to lift her out of the chair. And my father would come in and he'd say, what do you think you're doing? Leave your mother alone. If she doesn't want to go with you, you should not force her to do anything. And my mother, the same thing with my dad, and you would just go like, oh my God. And but yeah, I mean, they would pick up for each other, so that was also
Yeah,
did not make it
that's
easy.
that's an amazing dynamic, I think.
um
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. So it was you and your brother,
Mhm.
and one of the things you did mention that your brother, he was the primary caregiver, and we've met in the past and talked in the past. And one of the things that you have said to me about this arrangement that I have shared many times in other podcasts when we're talking about siblings is that and make sure I get this right. You told me that your brother was the primary caregiver, but that didn't put you off the hook. You saw your role as being the one to take care of your brother.
Yeah, so the thing is my brother's single and I'm married. Um, as a back piece of this, my mother never was that keen on my choice of who to get married to, and she was not shy ever about expressing that disappointment. So the idea that she would ever come and live in our house was just absolutely inconceivable. Um, so my brother was really the only one who could. He brought them, he rented a larger house and he had them come stay with him there. We brought all their furniture and we recreated the layout
Mhm.
as best we could. Um, and so my brother was the one who had to he was living with them. And it was hard because I didn't always agree with the decisions that he was making about things, and we would discuss that. But at the end of the day, he was living it and I wasn't. And so I had to decide that even if I didn't agree with what he was doing. So then I felt like I didn't want to abandon him. I didn't want to abandon my parents either. And so I created a role for myself. And I said, he's their caregiver and I'm his caregiver. And so I felt like, okay, the best care they can get from him is if he is in the best condition he could be in. And he was up, all many nights, all night, and then he'd go to work the next day. And so I would do stuff like, he'd say, oh, listen, dad has to go to the dentist. Can you get up here and take him to the dentist? Or, we need groceries or whatever it was. And he lives a good hour and a half from me. So it was not that easy. And then I would say, listen, Gordon, you need to take a week off. I'll come up and stay with mom and dad, and you just go someplace. That only really happened once because he was so concerned that they weren't being watched for. But I had to swallow a lot of stuff because But I also felt like my relationship with him was super important. And I knew that A, it was important to my parents that the two of us got along. And we've had, as brothers do, we had very different lives, lived in very different parts of the country, didn't always see each other that much. So I felt like I needed to make sure that as my parents declined, that I was going to maintain a relationship with my brother. That was important to me. Um, and so I would go up there every week or every other week, and try to pitch in on that stuff. So that was a
Mhm.
choice that I made. And I know a lot of siblings have trouble doing that kind of thing. I mean, I've spoke,
Right.
like, so but it was a conscious decision on my part. I am going to do this, and this is how it's going to go.
That's really great. I think too, you speak to something, your awareness that he was doing he was boots on the ground. And so the acknowledgement of, okay, he's doing that heavy lifting, and now what can I do to kind of, like you said, swallow some things, but then support him when I can. I think even when you have a really close-knit group of siblings, ultimately there's like one person who's doing maybe that emotional stuff. That's the high touch kind of thing. And then there may be somebody doing things like finances, or maybe somebody's, oh, I'm going to be the medical person and talk there, or whatever, or the legal person or whatever. But an acknowledgement that these roles are all very different, and then yeah, supporting one another, because ultimately when your parent goes, there you are. And so to maintain a relationship, if that's important to you, and then
Right.
what you said too is like it was important to your parents to know, to at least have a belief that you were together on this. That's beautiful, Frank. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I think a lot of people could learn that lesson. There's a lot of sibling strife and rivalry and bad feelings and broken relationships that come because of the dementia caregiving. That doesn't have to be the case.
No, but it's really difficult. I mean, there's all
Mm,
sorts of like crazy emotional stuff.
hmm
My mother would say something, and I would think to myself, "You always say that," or like there was always this kind of tension between her and my wife, and that didn't disappear. And so there was this kind of like, okay, this is who she is, and that's not changed. But we're going to swallow that and ignore it and step up to the plate. Another, awkward thing, but I know it's very true for many people, is when my mother was in the hospital, she would be uncomfortable and angry, and she would say all kinds of stuff. And some of it was not very comfortable for the caregivers in the hospital. She would talk about their race, or she would talk about the way they dressed, or something that was a hot button, extremely embarrassing thing for her to say. And we were lucky that the hospital that they were in had a special floor for people with dementia. So all the nurses on that floor, regardless of what it was that they had, cancer or a heart failure or, whatever, all those nurses were used to dealing with people with dementia. And I remember she had to have her blood taken at 3 in the morning. And she just lit into this woman and talked about the color of her skin and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, oh my God, she should, she would never say this in her normal life. And it's like how horrible and how embarrassing. And I took the woman, I went and spoke to the nurse afterwards, and I said, I am so sorry that that's what my mother said. I know that's not her. And she looked at me and she said, you know what? It's goes with the illness, and we are trained to just let it go off our backs. We don't take it personally. And I was like so grateful. And I think that's very unusual, and it's really, those are things that are very hard to deal with, I think.
Yeah, that's tough. And I'm sure she appreciated you though coming and talking to her, and that maybe that's what is important too, is acknowledging.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can do is go like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry that she said that," because that's
Right.
not. who I am or she is, and please don't make that interfere with the care you're giving her. But it, again, it's like it's this illness, and you have to be out there as a caregiver in front of it. Like, or, my brother was, at one point, something happened with my dad, and they wanted to give him general anesthesia. They were going to take care of something. I forget what. Oh, I guess they discovered that he at some point in his life had fractured a rib and it hadn't been taken care of, and something else had exacerbated it. And we're going to fix this. We're giving him. And my brother just said, no, you are not giving him general anesthesia, because what a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know, but he did because he was paying attention to it, is that if you have dementia and you have general anesthesia, it will make it far, far worse. You will not bounce back to where you were. And the doctors were like, no, 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 we're doing this procedure. This is what we have to do. And my brother said, no, I have the medical proxy and you are not going to do that. And it took a lot of back and forth. And it was but you need to be an advocate, whether it's apologizing for your mother saying some horrible thing or interceding with a doctor and saying, you're not doing that procedure. You have to know what you are willing to put up with and what your parents are willing to put up with. And so
Mm.
that's part of the caregiving.
Does anybody here in the audience have a question or a comment for Frank? Susie, I know you want to say something.
I have, yeah, you're first of all, you're short. I love a short. I did a short with about it. I don't know if you saw my short as well, My Mom and the Girl, but so much of it reminded me of your project and just the powerful the power of just seeing what's actually happening, because everything in my film, although it was narrative, it was true, and it was things that I had, documented that stood out to me, and so much of it just is so resonates with what happened to you. But I mean, I think what's so important about telling our stories like you have and like I have is that and to Christy's point, is that people will have to recognize that they are not alone in this, and and I hear this statement a lot in on my podcast, that you've seen one Alzheimer's experience, you've seen one Alzheimer's experience. I agree to that, but then I also agree there's so many similarities, because your mom, I could have just put my mom's hair on her head and there would have been my mother. She'd have these, like, very, very lucid moments, and that were so beautiful. And then the other ones were like, like your dad had 3 breakfasts, right? And my mom would have 17 bananas, because she'd walk by and have another banana. I'd say, Mommy, you just had 2 bananas. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll go home. I'll go home then. I don't want to eat your bananas.
I'll pay for it. Here's a
Yeah,
nickel.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we ended up, instead of fighting it, we just hid them, right?
Yeah.
And that was how, and you learn to lean into it instead of pulling them back into your life. And then you do find all the beauty that's still there. And it's a different kind of beauty, but I saw so much beauty in your parents that I mean, it was like I was so moved by them. When your dad, when he says, you're my mom, I was your first son, and he's saying to her, yeah,
Oh, I know that.
I know, it's so touching. But you know what? It's just he loved her so much that it suddenly she was replaced by his own mother in his mind, right? And that's okay. And so wait, I just took a couple of notes. So when you talk about, and I think this is important if anybody's listening, because you bring it up so beautifully as well, is like, our parents were these fierce, amazing pistols of people that entered the world with such ferocity, and and they're not the same people, but that's okay. That you learn it's okay. You fight when you don't understand it at first. It's like, where's my mom, the one I know? And then you realize that, as people progress in anything, as a little child grows, they're not the same person that they were at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And, when they say they want to be a princess when they grow up, and when you ask them when they're 20 what they want to be, it's a little different.
Right.
And if you ask my mom, how are you today, Mommy? She will go, I am great. I'm alive. Life is good. And the alternative sucks. And so now you've got that mommy who's enjoying her life and is enjoying her waffles and her coffee and seeing your face and singing songs because she was a singer. And that was it. Life, the bar changed for
Right.
her. So
But
you
there's
have
there are certain core things I noticed, and I'm sure you must have too with your parents, and certain personality traits that were distinct to them that
yeah,
stuck right through to the end. I mean,
to
my
the
dad was
end.
always so even keeled about everything, and even though everything was nothing was the way he wanted it, and he wasn't, he still was like, okay, this is the way it's going to be. And in a million years, my mother would never have said that when she was 30 or 50 or 90. And she was unwilling to accept anything that wasn't the way she wanted it in the first place. And she remained that way stubbornly and annoyingly,
Yes.
even through her dementia. And so, even though she didn't know a lot of stuff, the core person of who she was that drove her was still there. And that I didn't really see until I'd finished with the film, actually. I mean, I really didn't come to that understanding about them because they were so, grossly different from what I was expecting. And then I didn't see until I started watching the film that I'd cut, and I'm like, geez, that's, she's still in there. Um,
Oh yeah, that's the beauty of it is that they're there. But so if the more you can make it okay for them, the more you can alleviate that stress for them, it makes their life better. It's not going to be stress-free, of course not. And if your dad's enjoying 3 breakfasts, then he should enjoy 3 breakfasts. And if they're enjoying dancing, and that's a beautiful thing, why not? They are the epitome of Zen. They are teaching us how to be in the moment.
Yes, that I think
Mm.
is very true. It's in the moment, and you have to yourself be in the moment with them. And that, I mean, there's this thing that, I mean, many people that are caring for Alzheimer's patients will say, our our group leader used to call it creative fiblets.
Mhm.
But my mother would say, when's my mother going to come? She's supposed to come here for dinner.
Mhm.
And instead of saying your mother's dead,
Right.
um, which is true. You say something along the lines of, "Oh, she's in Florida and the plane got delayed and she's not coming tonight." And so you
Okay.
make up a story that is a little bit more palatable, and then you move on to something else.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that's in a way, and there was this piece of me of like, I can't believe I'm telling a lie to my parents.
Right.
And this is so bogus. And how can I, manipulate them this way? But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is that they are living in such a moment by moment thing
Exactly.
themselves that you go with them in a way that makes it a lot easier for everybody. And it, as my brother used to say, do I have to kill grandma again? The honesty comes from the emotion rather than necessarily. I mean, it may be dangerous for a kid to, go in a swimming pool by themselves when they're
Exactly.
2 years old. And you can't say to a 2-year-old, no, it's dangerous for you because you don't know how to swim and you could drown. You just say, we're going to go have birthday cake now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you move the
Redirect. You
story
redirect.
somewhere else. And with your folks, I mean, you're protecting them, you're caring for them, and you're expressing that. And that's where the honesty is.
Yes.
It's not with the details. But
Yes.
it's very, those are not obvious things and they're
They're
not
not.
easy.
And,
Um,
and nobody understands it until you've lived it. And that's why, I didn't understand it.
a film like yours, or mine, or other people's. And I had a similar thing to what you said earlier. Of I sent the film to a medical school in Philadelphia, and this doctor, she said, "Oh, it's very moving, but you know what? I've seen a zillion of those stories, and there's nothing new here." And I don't think they understand that when you watch law, a TV show like Law and Order or something else, it's like, is there anything new on any of those murder mystery stories? There's like, 4 different variants of what that story is, and it gets told again and
Yeah.
again. And it can move you or not move you for various reasons. But
Right.
I think that hearing these stories, even though the themes are repeated, and the people are different. I think that's what's the most interesting, is that as different as, there's, however many of us that are here in this room right now, all of our parents are probably nothing like each other. And yet a lot of what they're experiencing is identical. And I think that that is a very powerful thing to see. Oh, here's this person who's very athletic, who's very physical and verbal. And here's this other person who's really skinny and frightened and not that active, or whatever their differences are. And they're going through the same stuff. And I think it's very powerful to see that in
Yeah.
different variants.
Those details are so important, and they make all the difference in the world. And so if you are experiencing this kind of journey, then those are so important. And because they are very similar, but it's like, I watch your film, maybe somebody else's mom wasn't like your mom, but I get it.
And I was just going to say, I think that the point here that I'm hearing that's also very clear is part of AlzAuthors' mission, right? To light the way for others. But you don't stop at 2 authors and say, well, that's it. We've told all the stories. It's like, forget it. We've got 400 and filmmakers and podcasters. It's because, and that's what's going to change the tide for people understanding some things, is having things to see, listen to, read, and understand different nuances. But you're right. I mean, you've watched one Law and Order, you've seen them all, right? But you're going to keep watching because and sometimes there are different things in there, but and I think having that magnitude, a lot of stories then brings more attention to the situation. So the two of you bringing something to the screen that people can see is so helpful. So thank you so much. It's such a contribution to the cause. I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and it's also nice to hear the different things, right? Like I love hearing both of you tell your personal stories, because and a little bit about your person, because it's also the caregiver story. It's also understanding the caregivers. Like I understand why people want to correct, because they think maybe they think that this is going to cure them. If I just keep them really clear on what's true, then maybe they won't keep descending. But that's not really how it works. The correcting can be more harmful than the entering their world, right? And so, Susie, you gave the example of working with talking to kids, and you did too, Frank. It's like, we can be really matter of fact and say, no, if you get in that pool right now, you might drown, but that's probably not the best way to talk to a 2-year-old. And maybe that's not the best. Like, I liked the part in the film, Frank, where your dad's talking about what a new endeavor he's got.
Yes.
And
he had to go to New Zealand.
Oh my gosh. And I remembered different people in my life who have been, we could say it's delusional, but you know what? Who cares? Great, you're going to New Zealand. That's awesome. When are you going to go? And he's telling your mom, 2 years. Oh,
2 years.
I mean, he's got it down. I'm like,
and your mom's like, that's the long time.
How fascinating. How fascinating, Yeah, it's a long time. What am I going to do?
That's a classic thing for my dad. It's like, I got to get to New Zealand sometime.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say to Christy and Frank, God bless you, having to go through it with both your parents at the same time. That has got to be incredibly hard. But then again, thank God they had each other, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I would say to our listeners, if you want to hear more about that, we did a podcast, several people talking about having 2 parents. So there is that there, and you can hear from different people about how it was. It's a fascinating podcast. We have quite a few. So there you go. And Frank was on that. Frank was on it.
Who wrote the book that one of your other members of your team wrote a book about that with their parents?
Alzheimer's daughter, Jean Lee, I think is the one.
I love that book too. And that
Jean Lee and Vicky Tapia. There are 3 of us on the management team.
3 out of the 6.
Yeah.
3 out of 6 on the management team had 2 parents.
Amazing.
But
that book was very tender and very lovely, and and I think that also is, we just need stories. Stories
Right,
are
because that's
travel.
another aspect of it, right? Like we think about all these things and that's why I'm so glad that we're doing this. And again, I'm just gushing because I have both of you here. It's just wonderful. And then I want to ring in and say, Marianne wrote a lovely,
Yes, you did.
lovely fiction book. And we can't ever underestimate how powerful fiction is because fiction kind of leads us in a story and we can identify with people on an emotional level even if they're fictional characters. And we have some really wonderful fiction books too, and that's important. So
Yeah,
Yeah, we
absolutely.
do.
Absolutely.
I did have one more question for Frank. How did you make the title of your film? Because it's a little strange.
Yeah, it's funny. I initially I titled it Lousy, and that was the only title the only word in the title. And it had to do with the fact that that was my mother's, she just looked at me and when I asked her how she was feeling, and she said, lousy. And I'm like, is there anything I can do for you? And she's like, you could get me out of here. And I'm like, no, I'm not allowed to. And she said, I don't need permission from anybody. And she was just so pissed.
Oh,
And so for me, I thought lousy was such just so personified the fact that she felt like she was in a lousy situation. And I gotta say, it was pretty damn lousy for her to have this disease. But what I discovered when I started submitting the film to film festivals is that people would say, oh, we don't want to go see a film called Lousy. We don't want to see a lousy film. And people are much more literal than I ever imagined and did not understand the sort of defiant quality in that word. And so it got turned down by various people for that exact reason, I was told. So my wife and I sort of sat down and tried to figure out how we could modify it. And that's when we came up with the subtitle of Love in the Time of Dementia,
mhm.
which is and oddly it showed in one place, and they didn't even use the word. They had like a big marquee for where the film was showing, and they didn't use the word lousy at all. They titled it Love in the Time of Dementia. So that was a difficult piece of it, actually.
Where
Yeah.
can people find the film, Frank?
So the film is distributed by a company called Terra Nova Films. They're in Chicago. And you can see the film. They will let you screen it for, I think, something like $4. Um, and if there's any issues or problems, they can contact me directly, and I can through franksilverstein.com, and I will be happy to forward them information about seeing the film. If people have questions after they've seen the film and they would like to contact me, they should feel free to do that also. I love speaking to people and giving them whatever help and advice I can,
Hmm.
or just answering their questions.
And are you still available for film screenings and events and things like that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Great.
I love to screen it and talk to people. I always find it's so interesting. People have such diverse reactions to the film or pieces. One thing causes them to really respond strongly, and another group watching it responds to something different.
Hmm,
I, I
interesting.
I showed it at a school of public health, and all these young kids got all excited apparently about doing stuff with people with dementia as a result of that. I mean,
Mhm.
they were freshmen in that graduate program, and they were like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about doing anything with people in this situation." So it can be very moving, I think, for people and for me.
I want to thank you all for participating in our first film festival. This has been a truly unique experience for us. We didn't know what to expect, but it's just been delightful. And to the audience, please join us on November 10th to discuss Kitty Norton's film, Wine, Women, and Dementia. The premise behind her film is until there's a cure, there's community, just like this community that we have right here today. Her documentary tells the tale of dementia life through the lens of the family caregivers who strive to accept the beauty and the brutality, the hilarious and the horrific for themselves and their dementia person. It's a road trip around the US, literally, in celebration of family caregivers and that swinging dementia lifestyle. Over glasses of wine, the caregivers swap tales of love, humor, devotion, and death, and most importantly, how to honor life on the long road to death. Be sure to watch the film prior to our film discussion. If you made it here, you should have all the links to the films and the film discussions. All the information about the film festival is on our website, AlzAuthors.com. To be among the first to know everything AlzAuthors, please consider subscribing to our mailing list. You'll find it on our website. Then check your inbox every 2 weeks for our news, introducing our latest author, podcast, special events, and more. Be sure to visit our blog, podcast, and shop at AlzAuthors.com to find more resources for your dementia journey. We've got some lovely gifts for caregivers, including our books and our poetry anthology, as well as some branded clothing and accessories to show your support for us. You can also follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and Blue Sky, where we share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey. Remember, you are not alone. One could sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir to create harmony. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an AlzAuthors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on AlzAuthors, please visit AlzAuthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to alzauthors@gmail.com. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.